Aloha and welcome to this episode of Conservation Conversations Hawaii. I'm your host Kuhea Asiu, and today I'm really happy that we're going to be continuing our conversation about invasive species. As we covered the last time with the Maui Invasive Species Committee, this February is Hawaii Invasive Species Awareness Month. And I'm very happy to welcome my guest today, Christy Martin, who is the Public Information Officer and Program Manager for the Seagaps, which stands for Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you, Kuhea.
Thanks so much. I'm very excited to have you here. You know, we've known each other for a while, and I know that you're one of the veterans. You've been around a long time. Somehow we became the old people in the industry. I don't know when that happened, but I'm very happy to talk with you and hear your mana'o on invasive species and what Seagaps does. So, you know, in that time that you have been around, I mean, when did you get started in conservation? What year was that?
Oh, gosh. Well, I was an environmental educator first. My first career was teaching marine science, and I started in outdoor education also on Oahu many years ago. But I will say that I was the first outreach person for the Maui Invasive Species Committee, and I started in the beginning of 2000.
Oh, that's exciting. You know, we were talking with Adam Radford, who is the manager of MISC now. And I know that there have been a couple of coordinators, outreach coordinators after you. So you were the pioneer that helped get everything started.
Very lucky to be in that position. I felt super grateful to be hired and to be entrusted with that duty. And it was such a blessing and a pleasure to help.
I like to ask everybody this question, as everybody in Hawaii does. You know, what high school did you go to?
Oh, I went to Roosevelt.
Roosevelt.
Go Rough Riders.
I was on the other side of the island in Wahiawa and went to Lelehua. Go Mules!
Yeah.
So
my mom is a mule.
Oh, really? Oh, we have to catch up later. Okay. Our families probably know each other. So what got you interested in pursuing conservation as a career? You know, back when, I think we're about the same age, going to high school then and college, I don't think the awareness and opportunities were what they were then. And so it's always curious to me how people got interested and ended up pursuing a career in this field. But what got you interested?
Yeah, I was always interested in nature as a kid. All kids have this natural curiosity. Mine just never really went away. When I was in high school, though, I had a marine science teacher that took notice of my interest and said, there's a program called the Bluewater Marine Lab. It was run by the University of Hawaii, and it was for high school students. And you would attend summer school, and it was all about marine biology and oceanography and seamanship and all ocean-related aspects class. And we were in school from like 8 in the morning till 2:30, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just this summer, learning about all these things.
Right.
And then you went on to become peer teachers. So we would go on research vessels, and we would teach other students what we learned. And I feel like the corollary today has got to be the Hawaii Youth Conservation Corps, and that's a program that takes young people and puts them in these training situations, really guides them and fosters that, and eventually they can get experience and hopefully be hired in conservation. So I kind of was guided by a good teacher.
Right. So there were some opportunities to get outdoors and, hiking clubs and science clubs back then. And so it was really great vehicles for getting students interested and giving them opportunities like that. Have you considered other careers? Where did anything else ever interest you besides a conservation career?
Well, I think my first thought was I'm going to be a flight attendant because I want to travel the world. And then that didn't really pan out so much for me. I taught marine biology for a while. I had a number of outdoor education jobs. So I wasn't sure it was going to be, conservation, and I certainly didn't aim for invasive species. I kind of fell into that one, but it has been so interesting.
It is.
Always something new to learn.
Right. And the work is never done.
Yeah.
So who is someone who influenced you when you were growing up and maybe to this day is still a source of inspiration, and why was that?
Yeah, I mentioned my high school marine science teacher. She was wonderful. The program that got it started was Marine Option Program, and the professor, the director of that program was Sherwood Maynard, and he was just such a visionary. He not only ran this high school program, but he also ran a college program, Marine Option Program, that's still running today. There's campuses on all of the UH campuses. There's chapters of MOP, as we call it. So there's two people. If I can name just one more sort of recent day mentor,
Absolutely.
it has to be Mark Fox. Mark Fox with the Nature Conservancy. He is such a statesman, and he's so genuine. Folks that don't know him, he's just one of these people that you just love talking with. He's just so welcoming and knowledgeable, and so I still learn a lot from him today.
Right, a shout out from Mark Fox. I really respect and look up to him as well. Very, very intelligent individual and a role model in this field for sure. So I also am curious, the pandemic has been with us now for over a year. It's been quite a long time. I don't think anybody expected it to be around as long as it has, and hopefully we're starting to see the tail end. But I'm always curious what people have done, with all their time at home and kind of being forced to look at life in a different way, and even, our relationships with our family and spending more time with our family than we ever have. Are there any new hobbies or skills that you picked up that you decided to give it a try since you have all this time now?
Yeah, well, I have to say that I was kind of expecting to be at home, and I hate to say, but coming from a science background, I could not see how we were going to get out of this mess. So I'm really happy that the end of the site. I can't believe it's so soon.
Yeah, so you're surprised that it is.
I would have noticed that I'm like, we're in this for like 5 years. But my hobby, so I did. I've always loved surfing, but when my daughter, I have a daughter, she's almost 12. When we would try to go hiking, and sometimes the trails had closed here on Oahu, where they'd be really crowded because that was the only thing you could do. They were so crowded that my daughter said, I think I want to learn how to surf.
Oh, okay.
So it became a mommy-daughter thing, and we still do either hiking or surfing on the weekends. So it's been my sanity, really. And what the heck, got to exercise too, if you just sit in this house where I am now.
Well, that's one of the things that, they were pushing people to do was get outside, get fresh air, get sun. So for your mental and physical health was to get outside. And the beginning of the pandemic, my husband and I were walking every day. We were probably walking 2 to 3 5Ks a week. Then we got busy with other things and stuff, but we have to get back to it. But it's so healthy for you to just get outside and get fresh air.
Yeah, mentally healthy as well.
Right.
And I have to admit, I did take up sourdough too.
So I want to, we want to talk about invasive species, of course, and, this boosting that awareness. But let's go back a little bit and just really help our viewers to understand a little bit more about native species. Because if it weren't for native species, invasive species, introduced species, invasive species wouldn't be an issue. So let's go back to native species and tell us, what are they? What does it mean to be a native species? Yeah,
that's a great way to start. As a former teacher, I always like to try to set definitions because that's so important. So native species, the Hawaiian Islands have have always been sort of surrounded by this moat, the Pacific Ocean. So unlike other areas across the world, our islands have been very remote. There's never been a land bridge or anything like that to California or Alaska, or we've never been any closer than we are today to other Pacific islands. We're really out there. And it's been like this for more than 72 million years. When you look at the chain, the archipelago of the Hawaiian Islands, you can see the islands get smaller and smaller and smaller the further you get away from where the islands are still being formed, of course, the Big Island. And so that leaves a lot of time for things to be able to arrive, the first species, or what we call the colonists. And kids know this these days, right? Like the 3 Ws.
Right.
They came by wind, either on the jet stream, or they came by wings. They arrived on birds or in their stomachs or attached to their feathers. And then water current. Some people call that waves, but water current. And that's how we got some other seeds. Now, Paka, one of the most important and numerous shoreline plants, came via that 3rd W, via water current. And so all of these colonists, when they are able to arrive, successfully find a place to, like, plant themselves, or if you're a bird, you have to have brought along more than just you. You have to be able to have generations follow you, right? Otherwise, you just die out.
Mm-hmm.
So these things had to come. And so we consider native species all of these things that were able to arrive by themselves without the help of people or our boats or planes or these things that can just zoom across the Pacific these days. So all of the colonists and the descendants that changed over time from them. And there's so many. There's almost 20,000 native species, which is crazy. I mean, our islands aren't that big.
Right.
And that's terrestrial things and aquatic marine species. So 20,000, that's
right.
a good
And
count.
no easy feat for them to get here, too. And I'm sure there were, 10 times as many, if not more, that tried to come here and never made it, right?
Right, man.
Going to the 3 Ws, with environmental education in schools, I think a lot of kids growing up today are very familiar with the 3 Ws, wind, wings, waves, as working with young interns, in the past. And so they decided, well, we want to put a Hawaiian slant to it. So they started calling it the 3 Ms. So it was Moana or Makani for wind, and Manu for birds or wings, and Moana for waves. So I thought that was pretty cute. And it really kind of, because they came up with it themselves, it really stuck for that whole term that they were with us.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, just how remote and tiny we really are on the globe. And I think one of the most telling ways of seeing how small, not insignificant, but how small we are was that you're familiar with that photo that Lacey Veach, the astronaut, that sent that picture to Nainoa Thompson, showing the Hawaiian Island archipelago from space. And truly, we are so remote, one of the most remote set of islands in the world, right? So when you think about how species got here all those years ago, it was just not anything that was very easy. And then, so thank you for covering that. And then we have kind of a special category, right, of natives. Well, actually not natives, but introduced species. So that would be those that came over with the Polynesians. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So we are voyagers. So the first people to arrive were the Polynesians, and the best estimate for when they arrived is just about maybe 1,000 or so years ago. There's people that argue back and forth, but it was a darn long time ago. And they packed their canoe accordingly. They brought taro and kukui and coconut. Coconut actually didn't float here. They brought noni for medicinal plants. They brought chickens and dogs. They also brought strangely enough, they brought geckos. And geckos is an interesting story because, I mean, who would pack a gecko, right? Maybe a kid would, but we think that that's probably one of the first examples in Hawaii of this accidental hitchhiking invasive. And now you can find geckos all over the island.
I know. I know that they serve a role, but I'm really deathly afraid of geckos. I don't know why I developed that fear, but but I know they serve a purpose.
Yes. So the things that we know arrive with people. I mean, people used to say alien species, and it's even in our name, alien pest species. Just being sensitive to that, we really started moving away from that, and we started calling it introduced species. And for those plants and animals that arrived with pollination, they've been here for 1,000 years or so, and so we call those like canoe plants or canoe species. But they're introduced; they would not have arrived likely without the help of people and that canoe. For example, you can take a look at taro. How do you plant taro? You have to take the huli and you have to plant it. Really hard to get taro seeds.
Right.
And so we know that they wrap it really well. Like, the person in charge of packing is just carefully wrapping everything.
It's a big responsibility to be in charge of huli and making sure that passes down from generation to generation, for sure. Big kuleana. You mentioned introduced species, and another term that used to be used was exotic species, which we've also moved away from, for the obvious fact that when you talk about something being exotic, it sounds like something good, something exciting, and people are always curious about what is exotic. And so at some point, I don't know what year that was or what time, but I know we started moving away from that. And maybe you can talk about this too, is that I think there's a very important distinction. There are a lot of species that are introduced, but they don't become invasive. So it's not like anything that's not native should be really viewed as a threat. So can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. That's exactly the case. There's very few species that get moved around by people or even accidentally that become problems. And so thinking that everything that's not native is bad is just perhaps too much of a purist view. There's a lot of things that we really rely on here. You can think of most of the tropical fruits that are quote Hawaiian. Mangoes and pineapples and even sugarcane. Sugarcane first arrived with the Hawaiian Polynesians. These things, just because they're not native here, because they didn't catch the 3 Ws or descend from those original colonists, that doesn't mean necessarily they're bad. But we do have to start paying attention, though, when they do become invasive.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a federal definition for invasive.
I was just going to actually ask you about that. And, there's a formal definition, but I also want you to, if you can, give us your quick definition that helps people remember that, because they may not remember a formal or long definition of what invasive species is. But if you have something as an educator that you've been using that really helps people remember and keep that in their mind, that they can repeat to others and explain what is an invasive species.
Yeah, well, it is pretty short. It is a non-native species, so an introduced species that causes economic or environmental harm or harm to us. And, all of those things are pretty subjective. It's hard to tell sometimes when a species, quote, crosses the line. But we had to document that in definitions. Where do we draw lines? Where should we make decisions? And we do that all the time. So this is one of those areas that we've drawn a line for things that are not native to the area. They've been moved out of the system that they're used to into this new system. They don't fit into the ecosystem, and they start pulling out the threads from the existing fabric of the ecosystem. So they're causing harm to the actual fabric of the species that are native to that area, that perhaps has been there for millions of years, or even thousands of years.
Right. I really like also how Adam explained, what invasive species means is that it's the one thing that can change everything, whether it's your health, your safety, your economy, culture. It can change. It is truly the one thing that can change everything and the way that we enjoy life here.
Yeah, I wish there were just one though.
Yeah.
I know, literal one thing.
So let's talk about Seagaps. And, prior to Seagaps, again, that's the coordinating group on alien pest species. Prior to that, there was someone named Alan Holt, who I fondly remember. In the 1990s, he just had this awareness that alien species, as they were called at the time, right, were a threat, and wanted to explore that more. So take us back to that time and, from Alan kind of recognizing, the threat of invasive species and how he proceeded to go forward and get something formalized to where we're at with Seagaps today.
Yeah. So, and I wasn't working in this area at that time, but in talking to Alan and some of the folks that were around when Seagaps formed, it really did start. So Alan Holt was the director for the Hawaii program for the Nature Conservancy. And he tells the story of just doing this, big planning session and just, putting together their strategies. And he says that he just woke up and thought, oh my gosh, we've got all of these strategies to restore species, but we don't have a strategy for invasive species. And it really started from there, just realizing that, there's an 800-pound gorilla in the world, and we should tackle it the same way that we strategize everything else. And so he started by working with the partners at the time, National Resource Defense Council, to actually start documenting, well, what's our system? What is the problem? What can we do to help fix things? And this report, it was, published in 1992, and it documented a whole bunch of different gaps in our alien pest prevention and response programs for Hawaii. And that's what led to our name, Seagaps.
Just to give another shout out to Alan, and I think a really big factor in being successful in any kind of endeavor to protect the environment, to battle invasive species, really comes down to the relationships between people. And I always admired Alan for his ability to really develop really good, positive relationships with people and getting people to want to work with him. And I think that's a big part of, that success early on. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. Invasive species work, public health work, recycling work, it doesn't matter what you're doing. So much of what people do is about people. And it's about how do we work together to address whatever problem is we're facing. And so my job, I thought it was going to be a biologist. Turns out I'm a people worker.
Well, you're still it's still biology in a sense. You're dealing with Homo sapiens.
With a side order of biology in there.
Right. Actually, as educators, I think it's we have one of the best jobs, really, because we get to work with people. Right? People can be really challenging, and when you can bring people together and do something really great, to solve a problem or to protect the environment, it's a really great feeling.
Yeah. So the group that Alan gathered, Seagaps, is basically, a few people from each of the agencies that are responsible for invasive species work. And our job is to continue to convene them so that we can all work together.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We try to look at the gaps and try to put the people together that can possibly fill them.
Yeah, maybe you can talk about this report that came out, the silent invasion, and the snake is on the cover as sort of the poster child. And I don't know if this is around the time when we started to become aware of the brown tree snake, because even though people say we have no snakes and no native snakes, we actually do. There's a native sea snake, right? The yellow belly sea snake, but nobody ever
it's not
sees that.
Endemic in that it doesn't reproduce here, so it gets blown ashore once in a while when we have storms. Yeah.
Right. But other than that, of course, snakes is an animal, a species we don't want to see for many different reasons.
Yeah.
But that became the poster child. So can you tell us more about that report and what that resulted in?
Yeah, that report really grew out of the Alien Species Action Plan work. And you folks on Maui are lucky to have the Alien Species Inspection Facility, the ASAP facility.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that rose out of some of this work as well. And it's at the airport, and it is to look in the air cargo coming in primarily. But the report that you're talking about with the black cover and the red snake coming down, that was put together by one of the local graphic artist companies here, still operating in Honolulu, and Nature Conservancy, as well as someone who was with DLNR at the time, just working on, okay, how do we get people's attention? How do we make this real? And what they did is they selected what we call, quote, poster species. What is something that's going to affect public health? What is something that's going to affect farmers? What is something that's going to affect visitor industry? And they wrote this report around those different values to reach different audiences. And there's 10 points at the end, things that we have to do to be able to make good progress on fixing the system.
Yeah, there's nothing that quite gets your attention like a picture of a snake. I mean, we have little fire ants, we have nettle caterpillars, coqui frogs, but nothing quite gets your attention the way a snake does.
Right.
So let's talk about the gaps that the group identified. There were gaps in the system that needed to be addressed. So one of those was having different agencies who have different jurisdictions and mandates, right? So that was a gap when maybe you have, something is falling between the cracks and not being addressed properly. So that's one of the gaps that was identified. And how has that come along since then, since Seagaps has formed?
Yeah. Well, great things have happened on that. So when, let me give an example of this. Each agency has their area that they're responsible for. Agriculture, they're looking at a certain set of species that can possibly harm agriculture. And in some ways, forest issues as well. However, the other agencies are perhaps more focused on things that are going to impact public health or transportation. So when you have these different mandates, there's things that can sneak in that aren't on somebody's radar or aren't on somebody's list of things that they're responsible for. Mm-hmm. And what ended up happening is that the Invasive Species Committee formed. And they work not on only state land, they work there as well, not on only federal land, they work there as well. But they really take an island as a total management area and think about where the pests might show up.
Right.
And they work there. So We've long known that National Park Service, they're great, but they've had to wait until pests reach their property to be able to work on it in the past. It's been a little bit of change since then, but for the most part, they wait until it gets to their doorstep. And by then, it's covering the rest of the island. So we have to work closer to the invasion point. And I think some of those things have been, we've come a long way since this 1992 report.
I would agree. I think it's really kind of neat. And I know that more people are needed. And it can't be just people who do conservation work as a job. It really needs to be everybody's job to be looking out for these things and reporting them as soon as possible. But I really think it's neat and it's progress that we have the Department of Agriculture and really good steps have been made to kind of beef that up. But they are the first line of defense to try to make sure that things don't get here, or once they get here, they can hopefully tackle those. And if they manage to get out into the wild and in other spaces, that we have the Invasive Species Committee. And then beyond that, we have our watershed partnerships. We have the National Park and DLNR and others that are also tackling a lot of these invasive species sometimes I think when they're already established, which is, really unfortunate. But we have people at all levels of the game, trying to tackle invasive species. Another area was that they identified were gaps in laws that might have been either non-existent or maybe outdated. And are there a couple examples you want to share?
Oh gosh, yes. So a lot of our laws were set up back in the 1950s or so, and it really they were set up to protect like pineapple and sugarcane. So it made it illegal to import grasses because it might carry in a pest that would affect sugarcane. Well, times have moved on, and we don't have laws that would be sensible to better protect Hawaii. For example, we only recently have the authority in statute to list plants that are themselves invasive so that we can prevent them from coming in.
Mm-hmm. That's from
so we could list a plant and restrict it from entering because it carried a pest, but we couldn't list the plant to prevent it from coming in because it itself was going to go eat the hillside and become invasive.
Right. So another gap was, of course, money. I mean, we can make all the best plans we want, but we need money to support that. So how do you think that has progressed in terms of even support at the legislative level for funding for this work?
Well, the fact that we have invasive species committees, the fact that we have watershed partnerships, we have the Hawaii Ant Lab, we have staff for the Hawaii Invasive Species Committee. I have staff these days. I think funding has actually gone up. I shudder to think, though, that that's just for these gap-filling measures. Funding for agencies, particularly Hawaii Department of Agriculture, has actually gone down.
Oh, boy.
And they have less than 0.5% of the entire state budget. And that's to do all agriculture. That's to market and help put in water systems and all of that. And a little tiny bit that's to help prevent invasives from coming in. And then there's a little tiny bit to do biocontrol, and a little tiny bit to help with the fire ants.
Yeah. Maybe if there's an updated number on this, but the last figure I heard was that the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Land and Natural Resources together make up then less than 1% of our state budget. And if that's still current?
I would have to look at it. It is difficult because the agencies, as I mentioned, they've got other parts to them. For example, DLNR, if you're going to add it to DLNR, they've got a whole section that does water resources. They have a whole section that does other things that are not necessarily invasive species focused. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to get that number. how much are we investing in biosecurity? Both the prevention as well as the response. We did a back of the napkin. Actually, it's more complex than that, but we did a calculation that
1% is
that basically calls for 55 million investment per year.
Yeah, that's not small
on
money.
Invasive species.
Yeah, that's not a small amount, but still, it's not enough. And
it's not a small amount, but I mean, if we flip up on, let's say, brown tree snakes coming in, and they become established, we can expect, and this was good work done by USDA, National Wildlife Research Center, that found it would cost us $2 billion a year.
Right. So is that one of the things that Seagaps does, is you look at the spending across the state, across agencies and organizations, to look at what people are spending on invasive species management and know what the figure is that is being spent on this every year?
No, I wish we could do that. The last time it was done, it was done by, economists to actually try and get that answer. It's just so hard. We tried to develop a questionnaire, and it was tough.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, maybe that's a master's project or something for someone. I mean, I think it's important because it's hard to go to bat for more money. We need more money when you don't know how much is being spent and how much more you need. So I hope somebody, really a student smart in math especially, can take that on and really look at that, and so that we can really get a better picture of where we need to be.
Yes. We do have some things, individual pieces that we know, so cost to that, but we don't have a comprehensive number.
Yeah, and so because you worked with MISC and you lived here on Maui, you know that we're very proud of our Maui County government, our council administration that really dedicates a lot of its a budget to not just invasive species but overall conservation efforts. And the budget is dedicated more funds to this than all other counties combined. And I just would like to see other counties kind of move in that direction as well. And, maybe it's getting folks out in the field and seeing some of these issues for themselves and having a better understanding. And I really think that sometimes people are not moved to do anything different unless it affects their health, their safety, or their wallet. And so I think that's where some of these conversations have to go, and get people to understand the bigger picture and the impacts on them.
Yeah.
Another gap that was identified was about the rapid response. And I know there's so many good things that have happened since then. And so can you tell us about some of those?
Yes. Oh my gosh. So the Invasive Species Committees, also, by the way, a brainchild of Nature Conservancy, Alan Holt et al., partnerships on each island to function as rapid response teams, supplementing what's already done by agencies like Department of Agriculture. But on Maui that they've had island-wide eradications, and sometimes the only instance of things in the state eradicated because there's a rapid response team. Veiled chameleons is a great example of that. They were very likely smuggled in, planted in an area where they thought they would flourish, like Jackson's chameleons did. But it was found pretty quickly and eradicated. If we did not have a rapid response team that could quickly, use their skills to go and figure it out and do it and be on it and follow up, who knows? They'd be well established by now.
Yeah, along that goes hand in hand with that, with rapid response, is public awareness and education, and you've been a big part of that and various campaigns. So tell us maybe one of the most successful, or the ones that you've been the most proud to be a part of.
It has to be Kuhea Death Outreach. What a sad situation. This disease that's not native to Hawaii, bred in part by beetles that are not native to Hawaii, killing our most beloved native forest tree. So one of the other ways that it can spread, though, is by people moving the plants or moving things that carry the fungal pathogens. I mean, it's invisible. They're pathogens. You can't see them. They're tiny. How about they can move in soil and things like that, and they can move in the plants themselves? So that really required outreach to be able to convey that information to people. And I'm just one member of a team that probably numbers in we might have 50 people in different places working on this issue, but just a small outreach team trying to convey this to the public and getting support and understanding and real help. So all the way from getting Kumu to help us carry that message to the halau, and to school teachers that are writing letters and requesting rulemaking and things like that. It's been amazing to be part of that movement.
Yeah.
And we're just so happy people are taking it seriously.
Yeah, it's I do think that it's one of the most successful campaigns as well, because it's it's talked about pretty widely, and a lot of people have heard of it. They may not be able to explain it, but they have certainly heard of it, and they know that it's impacting the beloved ohia. And so, we were talking earlier about a lot of people getting outdoors and being encouraged to get outdoors during this pandemic. And so along with that is education about, hiking in different places and cleaning your boots and your gear and not spreading invasive species. So is that something that you feel that, or have you folks concentrated more in that area because of the pandemic and people getting outside, or?
We've been trying, for sure. Right before the pandemic hit, we were able to get some funding, both private donor foundations, stepping up and saying, what can we do? And as well as state funding, we put in boot brush stations on most major trailheads with signage. We tested signage beforehand. Invasive Species Committees helped us with social science testing signage and see what works. And so at least that was set up before the pandemic. Those boot brush stations the brushes are just worn down to nubs at this point. So get back out there and changing out the brushes.
Well, they're probably one of the cheaper things to buy, right?
Right. So yeah, there's that. One of the challenges though is that it's not just the brush. You have to decontaminate. The pathogen can stay alive in that soil. You can not only brush it off, you can brush it onto your boot. And so that second thing, squirting with rubbing alcohol for your soles of your shoes to kill the pathogen. Well, there was a run on rubbing alcohol. I don't know if you noticed.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You can't buy it anywhere. And so we've just had to hope that, people have the message. They're using their hand sanitizer and sanitizer. I don't know.
Well, they're also saying that, with COVID, that it's a good thing to do is sanitize the bottom of your shoes because COVID can travel on your shoes. So if that also helps the rod effort, then great, the last gap that was identified here was that the agencies and organizations were not really communicating much, and to no fault of their own, but maybe it just kind of wasn't something top of mind at the time. But with the help of Seagaps, I think this has probably improved a lot since then.
Yeah, it's a constant thing though, right? You have to keep identifying who should be involved and keep inviting them and continue to have this facilitation of relationships. And so we do this. I feel like we make a connection like that several times a year, where we bring someone or an agency into a partnership that's focused on one of these issues. So, and it's ongoing because you have people changing out every time. I mean, good people get hired away or move up, and you're always dealing with new people.
Right. Well, on the bright side, we have a lot of emerging professionals, students who grew up here, went to school here, are invested here, who, through environmental education programs, internship programs, have discovered a passion and a career for themselves. So, that's really great. You don't have to convince them why, this is important. They're already invested because they grew up here. This is their home. So on the flip side, prior to the pandemic, you had some numbers here about, the numbers of people that we have. So it was 1.4 million residents across the islands, and an additional over 8 million visitors annually to the state. I know for Maui County, last year, not last year, but the year before the pandemic, our annual visitor rate was about 2 million a year. And the year before COVID, it went up to 3 million. I was just really shocked. And I think it was just really telling when all of the rental cars were parked because visitors stopped coming, and to see thousands and thousands of cars, parked in big fields, it just makes you realize how many cars are on the road and people are traveling from place to place and becoming vectors for invasive species, probably. So, we're in this time now where there's sort of a pause a little bit for invasive species arrivals. But I mean, I know, we heard recently that it was one new species is introduced species arrives every 3 days, which I was really shocked about. And so
actually, I don't think we've had a slowdown in the arrival of species. I think visitors are not the primary vector for bringing things in. However, what happens is when we have a lot of people here and we have a lot of imports. So that's how we get the majority of our species. It's through the importation of plants, of cut flowers, of produce, and even the containers that things come in on. So when there's more activity and more things going on, yes, we have more consumption and more things arrive. But
right.
But I don't think a whole lot of it direct visitor bringing things in.
Right. Yeah, with importing over 90% of our food and other goods. But when you look at the number of visitors who are here, and not pointing fingers at anyone, because we all live here, we all move about, but with the higher numbers of people on the islands, and moving around from place to place, especially going to some of these more special places, national parks, and more interest in ecotourism and people wanting to get out into nature. And we talk about invasive species on land, but I believe the rate of invasive species in the ocean is much, much higher. And I don't know how much we even know about it.
Well, first of all, weed seeds know no bounds. They go right on anybody's shoes, for sure. And you asked a question earlier that I wanted to get back to, if you don't mind. The rate of arrival for species, we don't have a great estimate. However, the one really good data point that we do have is before the ASAP facility was built, the Department of Agriculture did what they call a blitz inspection. They superstaffed Kahului Airport, and they opened the agriculture boxes coming in for just a few weeks. And they looked at everything. They tried to do inspections of the aircraft, just the airport. And they found an average of one new, not known to occur in Hawaii, insect or invertebrate like a slug or things like that, or plant disease arriving on those materials per day. And that's at an airport that gets less than 2% of the incoming air cargo. Now, those species don't necessarily become established, but some of them do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so you can just imagine what might be going on in Honolulu with all of that stuff coming in.
Right. So as long as we're importing anything, there's always that risk that things will come in. But, out of the thousands of introductions of species that, and many of which have become invasive, you have a top 5 list. You have the ones that concern you the most. So let's talk about those and what are they and why do they concern you?
Oh gosh. Okay. So in the true nature of all top 5, 10, whatever, we're going to go with the 5 first, right?
Yes.
And it changes, it changes almost daily. I'm like, oh no, that can be 5. That is just like, who?
Okay, pick your 5 today.
So, okay. So number 5, I'm going to go with mosquitoes. So we had no native mosquitoes up until whaling ships came and brought larval mosquitoes in the drinking water. That made it ripe for also spreading diseases. We had malaria that spread here. We had all sorts of human diseases. So we also had a disease called avian malaria. That's bird malaria. And these mosquitoes are still spreading it from bird to bird today. And that's why when you look out your window, even if you have like Kuhea in your yard, you're not going to see a native bird because it cannot survive at the low elevation levels where those mosquitoes still are cycling that disease around.
That mosquito line, it used to be a certain elevation that mosquitoes weren't known to go above, but I know with the warming of the planet that has moved a bit. Do you know what it currently is? Mosquitoes are generally not found above what elevation?
Yeah, well, that's a pretty specific number.
I'm putting you on the spot
no,
there.
Yeah, you are, totally.
Sorry, it used to be 4,000, okay. So you can take a guess.
Yeah, the funny thing is, and so I'm going to avoid your question without specifics because I don't have my reading glasses on. And instead, just sort of give you a visual. So the mountain and the area right under this area here, the top of the mountain is where there can't be any trees. It's just too high elevation. It doesn't work up there. So the trees are stuck at this level, right? And then the birds have to be above a certain level to be able to escape the mosquitoes. And so they're getting squeezed. Their habitat is growing exponentially tinier as the planet warms. And this is something that's happening today. We're seeing mosquitoes that we don't see normally in, for example, on Kauai, in the Alakai. Those birds don't have anywhere else to go. However, if we were to be able to use some technologies that are used for other insects, we could potentially reduce mosquito populations or their ability to transmit the virus.
You did just fine without giving a number. You explained it perfectly for everybody to understand, and that's why you're a pro. Okay, so so we have mosquitoes, and what else meets your top 5 list of most concerning invasive species?
All right, so I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say invasive plants.
Okay, that's a broad category.
For a specific reason, though. I know it's a broad category. But in that, it's got to be Myconia, strawberry guava, fountain grass. The triad of ick. My own title for it. So Myconia for, reducing watershed potential. They're very shallow rooted and grow very close together. So whenever there's a wind or rain event, all of that material comes shooting down and gets into the water, kills coral. It's strangely enough, Myconia is a coral issue as well as a watershed issue. Fountain grass, not just because it outcompetes other things in dry forest areas, but it's also fire promoted. So it catches fire and is able to burn and then regenerates from that burn, whereas the native dry forest plants cannot do that. So it gets eventually replaced. You know, when you land at the Kona airport, you see that beautiful flowing grass.
Yes.
That's all fountain grass. And it was introduced once.
Right. You know,
That's
I
all
used to live
spread from
on
one introduction.
I used to live on Hawaii Island, and I saw the slow but sure encroachment over time of fountain grass, you know, and people can look at vast canvases of lava and see nothing. Or, you know, but I look at it and it's beautiful to me. And then to see it taken over time by fountain grass was just really heartbreaking. You know,
Yeah.
what should be other things like ohia or ferns or whatever, you know, it's taken over by fountain grass. But I want to touch on, you mentioned strawberry guava, and that's one of the hard ones because you have some of these invasive species that are also, you know, locally valued for, you know, making strawberry guava jam, or using the sticks for massage sticks. They do make good massage sticks, but you know, sometimes that's where it's a challenge, because when people start to place or have value on some of these things, it's very hard to get the buy-in for controlling these things. But you know, with some of these species like strawberry guava, I don't think that there's a way to ever get rid of or completely deplete them. They will always be here, but they need to be controlled where they're important, like in watershed areas. And so it's an important message.
It kind of gets to that idea, you know, strawberry guava is not invasive where it's native to you know, Central South America. It is kept in check there by its you know, insects and parasites, things that live with it and on it. But it was moved here without all of those things, and so it was like dusted off and moved to Hawaii, and so you got this super clean plant. And sure, it was a long time ago, but it has continued to spread, and it is going to continue to spread because it doesn't have those things from its native habitat that kept it in check. So it's able to grow faster than other plants. It's able to outcompete. And our best wish for strawberry guava is that it just behaves a little bit more nice. We want to slow it down just a little bit. It should not be able to outcompete native species. It shouldn't be able to grow faster than it and shade it out.
Right. We shouldn't have to choose between strawberry guava and having water via healthy watersheds.
I'd like water.
You know? So see, we have mosquitoes, we've got plants, and what's next?
Yeah. I'm gonna just go back to Rabbitohea death. I mean, it is one of the hardest things I think I've had to work on. Again, it's a fungal pathogen. And when we've done some research on it, and this is not me, but this is the team doing research, we actually find that there's two pathogens. And one is native to South America, and the other is, well, we don't know if it's native to there, but it is from South America. It's closely related to the pathogens in South America. The other is related to Asia and the pathogens there. And so this means that it rode in on something, two different things, from two different areas, and was able to become established and infect ohia here.
How do you think they got here? Was it on landscaping plants from other places, or what was the vector?
It is really hard to tell. But these fungal pathogens, they can travel short distances, as we talked about, you know, in soil on shoes. But it would be really hard for them to travel long distances without being in agricultural products. So it could be plants, it could be food, it could be produce, or it could be, you know, live logs or not dried out logs, that sort of thing.
Okay, so what's the next one on your
All right, that's right.
list?
All right, moving down. We got two. You know, number two is something that we don't have here yet, but it just keeps me awake at night. And it was found in 2014 in the Caribbean area in Florida. It's a stony coral tissue loss disease, and the community has not yet identified what it is that's killing the coral, but it's infecting coral, and it is just killing the tissue so that all that's left is that white skeleton underneath that is not alive anymore, and it very quickly kills coral. We did see that it's moving. It appears to be moving around the Florida coast as well as Caribbean islands, showing up first in and around port areas. And it could be one of these things that's carried by ballast water. So the water that's taken up by ships to keep stability when they're offloading passengers, and they just need to be stable. So we don't know if that's what's going on. But can you imagine if we got a coral disease here? It's not here yet. We hope it never gets here. But the way the connectivity works, we do get vessels that come through Panama Canal and come to Hawaii from that region.
Right. Well, I mean, it's hard enough to control invasive species on land, but in the vast open ocean, that's got to be what a challenge. Okay, what's number 5 on your list?
Right.
You know, I have pages and pages of questions, and you're just going to have to come back again another time. But what's your number 5?
All right. I'm gonna end with number 1. It's invisible hitchhiking pests. It's those things you don't know what you're watching for, and that just means we have to be better about having people and technology at ports or even before ports to be able to keep some of these things out. We have to do a better job there, and sadly, that's what's so hard. Because if you prevent something, it's really hard to say, well, we saved you money because it's not here.
Right. Well, how can people learn more about Seagaps and maybe get in touch with you or a website? And can people get involved with Seagaps work at all?
Yeah, we... First of all, if anyone's interested in learning a little bit more, you can, look around our website, seagaps.org, segaps.org. Our contact info, so not just me, but the staff are also on that website, and you can reach out to us. I'm happy to talk to folks about this. You can also participate in our quarterly meetings. They are open to the public.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Forum. This is that forum that we hold that gets the agencies and the people together, and they're all via Zoom these days. So it is open for anybody on any island that wants to learn more and just listen in to these people. It's just very short updates from each agency, but you will get a sense of the breadth and depth of the work that way.
That's very cool and very transparent of Seagaps to do that. So are those meetings also posted on the website, or people can... They're posted on the website, yes.
Right. We even, when I get around to it, we even have meeting notes. They're not minutes, because they're not, verified by whoever was speaking at the time, but we try and do our best to take them and post them up there for people to see. So
I know you got into surfing and hiking, but, with the heaviness of this work, it can be quite overwhelming, I would imagine, at times, because the task is so big. But what keeps you motivated to keep going back to work every day and keep plugging at it?
It's the people, still. It's still the people. I work with great people, and it is so nice. It's when things come together, when you can work together in a good team, when you can rely on each other and get things done. It's amazing. It's great.
It's awesome. And I want to thank you so much for being here with me today to talk story and have this conservation conversation. And I have so many more questions, so I really hope that you'll come back and join us again. And I'm going to be calling you sooner than later.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Absolutely. I also want to thank our producers, the Riff Wailuku. Thanks to Brian and Arlie for bringing the show to you. And if all of you out there are really interested in these conversations, you like it, please subscribe, and then you will get notices for new shows that pop up on our YouTube channel, Conservation Conversations Hawaii. And if there's a certain question or a topic that you'd like us to explore and have a conversation about, please leave a message in the chat and be happy to look at that. So take care, and mahalo again, Christy, and we'll see you next time on Conservation Conversations Hawaii.